There is nothing quite like being lectured by your own grandson. Last Tuesday, while I was carefully backing my 25-year-old station wagon out of the driveway, my grandson, Justin, rolled up in his brand new European sports car. He looked at my vehicle and then at me and yelled, "Grandma, you're too old to drive that death trap. Seriously, get rid of it." He made me feel like a liability, a relic that needed to be put out to pasture. What he didn't know was that I had been waiting 20 years for the right moment to teach his arrogant generation a lesson. He told me I was too old to drive the car. He had no idea I still own the entire dealership he bought his new one from. Before we begin, comment, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you are watching from. So when we drop interesting video, you will be the first person to see it. There she sits, my faithful 1999 Volvo 850. I call her the Tank. She is beige, boxy, and looks exactly like a rolling rebuke to modern aesthetics. She has 230,000 miles on the odometer, faded upholstery, and the unmistakable scent of old coffee and dignity. She is the last physical connection I have to my late husband, Arthur, who bought her for me the year our family business finally took off. When I drive the Tank, I am not just driving a car. I am driving 2 decades of hard-won history. The rest of my world assumes I am living a comfortable, quiet retirement. They see the small, neat house, the occasional trip to the local grocery store, and the reliance on simple routine. My son, Mark, who manages the family business now, sends me a generous check every month and calls every Sunday to make sure the little woman is happy. He believes he has managed my financial security perfectly. He believes I am harmless. This perceived harmlessness is precisely why my grandson, Justin, felt entirely justified in his performance last Tuesday. It was a beautiful morning. I was carefully navigating the Tank out of my narrow driveway, a necessary piece of maneuvering, as her turning radius is, shall we say, classic. Just as I cleared the mailbox, a blur of polished obsidian and aggressive engine noise tore around the corner. It was Justin in his brand new charcoal gray European sports sedan. He had bought it barely a week ago, leveraging his upcoming and rather generous employee bonus against the loan. He jammed on his brakes, forcing the Tank to stop. He rolled down his tinted window, music thumping so loud it made my teeth vibrate. He didn't offer a wave or a greeting. He offered contempt. "Grandma, seriously," he yelled, leaning over the console, his voice dripping with theatrical frustration. He gestured dramatically at the Tank's beige flank. "You're too old to drive that death trap. It's a hazard. You can barely see over the dash. Seriously, get rid of it." His words weren't born of genuine concern. They were born of public image. He was embarrassed. He was pulling up in a $90,000 monument to speed and luxury, and his grandmother's relic of a station wagon was undermining his entire aesthetic. He looked at me, at my practical, simple sweater and my silver hair, and saw a liability, a relic that needed to be tidied away into the retirement home. He saw me as weak, old, and financially irrelevant. The insult was precise, surgical, and public. A few of the neighborhood children playing across the street stopped to watch the spectacle of the rich boy yelling at the quiet old woman. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to react immediately. The truth was my reflexes were still fine, and the Tank was mechanically sound. But Justin's casual cruelty stung deep. He hadn't just insulted my car. He had dismissed my entire generation, assuming that financial quietude meant powerlessness. I calmly rolled down my window all the way. "It's reliable, Justin," I said softly, my tone failing to convey the cold fury building in my chest. He scoffed, adjusting the designer sunglasses perched perfectly on his nose. "Reliable? It's a joke. It looks like something from a salvage yard. If you can't afford a lease payment, just ask Dad. Seriously, I'm late. Get that heap off the road." He revved his engine, making a theatrical show of waiting for me to move. I waited until he sped away, the unnecessary screech of his expensive tires marking his exit. Then, I drove slowly to the grocery store, the tank rumbling faithfully beneath me. But the routine was shattered. Justin had thrown down a gauntlet of arrogance, assuming that because I lived simply, I was simple. He had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the silent generation. He thought he knew the balance of power in our family, believing his father held all the keys to the kingdom and that I was merely a passive recipient of monthly charity. He had no idea that the keys to his entire world, his job, his father's respect, and the deed to the very dealership where his precious sports car was currently financed, rested quietly in my hands. His downfall had just been signed, sealed, and delivered by his own arrogance. My revenge would be executed not with shouting, but with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate ledger. The game was on. The game was on, but it had to be played with the utmost discretion. My quiet life was my greatest asset. It was the cloak that disguised the truth about the family's fortune. Everyone, including my son, Mark, Justin's father, and the current CEO of Arthur's Automotive Group, believed the financial narrative I had carefully crafted over the last 2 decades. The truth was that Arthur, my late husband, had been a genius, not just at selling cars, but at structuring ownership. He hated the idea of passive wealth breeding lazy entitlement. When he stepped back from the business just before he passed, he left a brilliant, multi-layered financial framework designed to maintain our control while testing the next generation. He had divided the corporation into 2 main entities. The smaller, lucrative Arthur's Automotive Group, which managed the daily operations and contained the bulk of Mark's managerial power, and the original flagship, the Grandma's Motors Trust, which owned the primary, sprawling, highly profitable dealership location and held the master licensing agreement. Mark believed he was the majority owner of the group, handling the expansion and the daily grind, and he was proud of it. He was not wrong. But what he didn't know was that Arthur, with my blessing and a knowing wink, had quietly transferred 51% ownership of the original Foundation Grandma's Motors Trust to me. This meant Mark controlled the group, but I controlled the land, the largest revenue stream, and the ultimate legal power of the entire foundation. I held the right of final executive veto over the flagship dealership, a power I had never once exercised. Mark believed my monthly check was a comfortable pension. In reality, it was a distribution from the 49% of the trust he controlled, carefully calculated to look like a retirement payout. I kept this secret meticulously. I never stepped into the flagship dealership, never questioned Mark's management, and never betrayed the fact that I held the absolute veto power over the company's most essential asset. My continued simplicity, driving the tank and living in my small home, was the perfect disguise. Why would a woman who owned the majority of a multi-million-dollar land asset still drive a 1999 station wagon? Because silence is power. Now Justin, with his arrogant dismissal, had breached the line of respect. He had mistaken my discretion for destitution. He assumed his father's power was absolute. I knew that I couldn't just tell Mark what Justin had done. Mark would just write him a bigger check and buy him another car. The lesson had to be delivered with consequences that matched Justin's inflated ego and financial recklessness. My target was clear: Justin's new, precious sports car. I knew Mark had given Justin a sales position at the dealership and promised a massive end-of-month bonus that covered the down payment and the first 6 months of the exotic cars payment plan. Without that bonus, Justin's fragile financial house, built entirely on anticipation and entitlement, would collapse immediately. I needed one piece of information: the name of the service manager at the flagship dealership. I called the dealership's main line, pretending to be a customer whose 20-year-old Volvo needed a specialist. I was quickly transferred to George, the service bay manager, and the crucial piece of my plan slid into place. George, an old-school employee who had worked with Arthur, was the kind of person who remembered courtesy and hated arrogance. He would be my eyes and ears. The battlefield was set. The arrogant grandson had insulted the quiet power he didn't know existed, and I was about to use the very business his family controlled to enact a ruthless, yet necessary, lesson in humility. The moment Justin sped away, screeching those expensive tires, my mind shifted from grandmotherly indignation to corporate ruthlessness. I pulled into the grocery store parking lot, not to buy bread, but to establish the final, perfect trap. Justin's downfall couldn't be a random misfortune. It had to be a consequence of his own entitled recklessness, delivered by the hand he least suspected. I drove the tank straight to a quiet corner, pulled out my burner phone, a simple flip phone I kept specifically for monitoring the business, and called George, the service manager. George was loyal to the spirit of the business Arthur built: hard work, honesty, and respect for all customers. He certainly didn't need to know my true corporate status, only that I was Arthur's widow, and I needed a private favor regarding a recent, problematic purchase. George, I said, keeping my voice low and concerned, I'm calling about Justin. My grandson. He just bought one of those charcoal sports cars, didn't he? George sighed, a heavy sound that spoke volumes. Mrs. Jensen, that boy is already trouble. Used his father's name 6 times during the transaction. Yes, the gray European sedan. Almost $90,000, and he financed almost every dime of it. This was the key. I feigned concern. That's exactly what worries me, George. He's young, and that car is an enormous debt. I just want to understand how a young man, barely 6 months out of college, could possibly afford the payments. George, eager to vent about management's poor choice of nepotism, spilled the essential details. He couldn't, Mrs. Jensen. Not on his salary. The finance manager put him on a balloon payment plan. It's huge. $500 a month minimum. The whole thing hinges on a massive end-of-month performance bonus his father, Mark, promised him. A $15,000 payout that's due exactly 2 days before his first payment. I leaned back against the faded velvet of the tank seat. There it was, the single point of failure. Justin's entire new identity, the car, the arrogance, the thumping music, was built on a deferred payment and a bonus check that didn't yet exist. I pressed George further. And if that bonus doesn't materialize, George? He's underwater, Mrs. Jensen, George replied grimly. He missed the full down payment, using the bonus as collateral. That car is technically ours until the bank confirms the first big payment. If that bonus doesn't hit, the finance department will initiate repossession by the first week of next month. Mark shouldn't have authorized the terms, but Justin pressured him. The plan solidified. My revenge wouldn't be dramatic, it would be surgical. I didn't need to create the financial crisis. Justin's greed and entitlement had already built it for me. I just needed to pull the rug out from under the only guaranteed source of income he had, his position at the dealership. I thanked George, promising him strict confidentiality, and hung up the phone. I drove the tank home, the beige exterior humming quietly. Justin was a symbol of everything Arthur and I had worked against. Entitlement without effort. He had insulted me by implying I was too poor and too irrelevant to be on the same road as him. Now I was going to prove that the road he drove on, the job he held, and the car he owned all answered to the power he ridiculed. The countdown to the end of the month and Justin's public, permanent humiliation had begun. All I had to do now was set the stage for the final corporate confrontation. The days following my conversation with George were a period of focused, silent waiting. The clock was ticking toward the end of the month, and I knew Justin's precarious financial timeline was nearing its breaking point. I had no intention of directly involving myself yet. I wanted Justin to create the final public justification for his own downfall. And as always, entitlement delivered exactly what I needed. On Friday morning, George called my burner phone, his voice tight with suppressed fury. Mrs. Jensen, you won't believe this. Your grandson is here. He brought the charcoal car in. What's wrong with it? I asked, already sensing the impending arrogance. Nothing, Mrs. Jensen. That's the problem. He claims the interior stitching is misaligned on the passenger seat and that the wind noise at highway speeds is excessive. It's nonsense. We checked the records. Everything is standard factory quality. But he's sitting in the service bay waiting area right now, pulling rank. Justin was creating a scene. He had marched into the dealership, waving his keys and loudly announcing to the service advisor, "My father is Mark Jensen, the CEO. This car is a liability. I demand you fix this cosmetic defect immediately, and I expect a complimentary high-end detail for my trouble. Put it on the warranty, or put it on Mark's personal account." George confirmed the worst. He told a new service advisor, in front of 3 other customers waiting for repairs, that the car was a lemon, and that Mark would be furious if this quality issue wasn't fixed for free. He demanded a $300 job be covered entirely by the dealership's goodwill budget, threatening a negative online review if we didn't comply. This wasn't just a minor complaint. It was textbook nepotism and arrogance broadcast across the main service bay. Justin was using the family name as a blunt instrument, damaging the dealership's reputation and financial goodwill simply to satisfy his own shallow demands. He had elevated a non-issue into a public demonstration of his perceived untouchable status. I knew this was the perfect moment. I had the complete financial vulnerability, Chapter 3, the legal authority, Chapter 2, and now, the indisputable evidence of employee misconduct and public abuse of power, Chapter 4. My next move needed to be immediate, decisive, and witnessed. "George," I said, my voice low and completely controlled, "I need you to do 2 things, and you must not tell Mark or Justin. First, do not fix the car. Tell Justin he needs his father's direct authorization for any complimentary service. Stall him. Second, I need you to confirm Mark Jensen's current location and schedule. I need him there tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for an unexpected site inspection. Nothing official, just a check-in." George, eager for justice against the arrogant young man, agreed instantly. "Consider it done, Mrs. Jensen. That boy needs a serious lesson." I hung up, feeling a cold, righteous certainty settle over me. The stage was set. The antagonist was currently sitting, entitled and impatient, in the arena where his quiet, unassuming grandmother held the ultimate power. The final act of this corporate education was ready to begin. The time for silent revenge was over. Now, it was time for the ownership reveal. I reached for the simple, heavy manila folder that held the private operating agreement of the Grandma's Motors Trust. Tomorrow, Justin would learn the true cost of dignity. Saturday morning arrived, crisp and clear, the perfect day for a corporate reckoning. I dressed simply as always, a practical wool skirt, sensible shoes, and the same silver necklace Arthur gave me 30 years ago. I wanted to look exactly like the harmless, retired Mother Mark believed me to be. The real power was contained entirely within the simple, brown manila folder tucked into my purse. I drove the tank to the flagship dealership. I parked her deliberately in the far corner of the employee lot, a beige beacon of humility amongst the polished metal of luxury cars. As planned, Mark was already there. George met me at the employee entrance, his eyes wide with nervous excitement. "Mark's in his office, Mrs. Jensen. He thinks you're just here for a chat." Justin is still out in the customer waiting area, raising Cain about his seat, stitching. I nodded, maintaining the calm composure of a woman stopping by for coffee. First, I needed to solidify the ground beneath Mark. I walked into his spacious, glass-walled office, where he was studying quarterly reports, a frustrated frown etched on his face. "Mother, what a surprise," Mark said, standing up, surprised but pleased. He kissed my cheek. "Everything all right with the Volvo?" "The tank is fine. Thank you, dear," I replied, sitting down. "I just wanted to stop by. Arthur always said you should never get too comfortable with success. I was curious about how sales were looking this month." Mark immediately launched into the details I needed. He confirmed that revenue was strong, but then his expression darkened as he discussed staffing. "Honestly, Mother," he confessed, leaning forward, "I'm having a problem with entitlement. Young people today, especially Justin, his sales metrics are dismal. He spends more time complaining about office politics than closing deals. He's been abusing the employee discount and running up unnecessary service bills, claiming them as goodwill fixes. I feign shock. Oh dear. And what about that large bonus you mentioned? The one that was tied to his performance? Mark sighed, running a hand through his expensive hair. That's the worst part. I gave him a verbal promise of a $15,000 year-end bonus to motivate him. He took the promise and used it to finance that absurd charcoal car. He's behaving like the money is already in his pocket. But honestly, Mother, his performance is so bad, I simply cannot justify the payout. I plan to cut the bonus entirely this afternoon. He needs to learn hard work. This was the confirmation I needed. Not only was Justin relying on the bonus to prevent repossession, but Mark himself had already decided to terminate the payment. My action was now merely accelerating a decision that had already been made by the CEO, making it less an act of malice and more an act of necessary corporate accountability. Mark, that's a difficult but responsible decision, I said, offering a sympathetic, motherly smile. Arthur always said that the business is bigger than any single employee, no matter the last name. Now, there was one other thing. Could you call George up here? I just wanted to ask him about the longevity of some of the older models' transmissions. Purely curiosity. Mark, reassured by my sympathetic support and my apparent focus on trivial operational details, happily picked up the phone. George, can you step into my office? My mother has a quick question for you about the 850s. The final pieces were falling into place. Mark was busy securing a confidential witness who would confirm Justin's arrogance and Mark's own plan to cut the bonus. I calmly opened my purse and pulled out the simple, heavy manila folder. I placed it on the desk, my fingers resting on the embossed seal of the Grandma's Motors Trust. The time for quiet conversation was over. The stage was set for the final, devastating ownership reveal. George entered Mark's office, looking worried, and offered a curt nod of respect to me before turning to Mark. Mark, completely unaware he was hosting the most important corporate meeting of the last 2 decades, was already launching into a question about the Volvo's transmission durability. Gentlemen, please, I interrupted, cutting smoothly across Mark's technical query. I picked up the manila folder and slid it to the center of Mark's pristine desk, the heavy seal facing them both. Before we discuss maintenance, we need to address something Arthur called moral inventory. Mark, you just confirmed that Justin is abusing his position for personal gain, damaging employee morale, and creating a liability with his financing. Arthur and I built this business on integrity, not entitlement. Mark frowned, confused by the sudden gravity of my tone. Mother, I told you, I'm cutting his bonus this afternoon. He'll learn his lesson. The lesson needs to be delivered now, Mark, publicly and effectively. He is currently out there right now, insulting our staff and disrespecting our customers, I said, standing up. I want you both to come with me. I led them out of the comfortable office suite and directly onto the gleaming white tile of the service bay floor. The Saturday morning rush was in full swing, and there was Justin leaning against the counter, still loudly debating the misalignment of his seat, stitching with a tired-looking service advisor. He saw us approach, his father, the CEO, and his seemingly innocuous grandmother, and he straightened up, expecting backup. Dad! Perfect timing, Justin called out, his voice dripping with false professional distress. Tell these guys that this $90,000 sedan shouldn't have defects. I demand they detail the interior for the inconvenience. Mark was about to step forward and quietly reprimand him, but I beat him to it. I walked directly to the counter, planted myself next to Justin, and looked past him at the stunned service advisor. I apologize for Mr. Justin Jensen's behavior, I said clearly. It is entirely unacceptable. Then I turned back to Justin. His smug look shifted to annoyed confusion. Grandma, what are you doing? I didn't answer him. I turned to Mark, pulling the ownership document out of the folder. I didn't hand it to Mark. I simply held it up so George and Mark could clearly see the embossed seal and the names at the top. Arthur's Motors was founded on a simple rule: integrity trumps bloodline. Since you, Mark, are compromising the business to avoid a difficult parental confrontation, I am exercising my right as the 51% majority controlling owner of the core assets, the Grandma's Motors Trust. Mark's jaw dropped. George gasped audibly. Justin just looked confused, pointing at the paper. What is that, Grandma? More paperwork. This, Justin, I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the service bay, is the deed to the land your expensive car is sitting on, the licensing agreement for your job, and the paperwork confirming that everything you value is ultimately controlled by me. I turned to George. George, I want you to immediately issue a final notice to Justin Jensen. His employment, effective immediately, is terminated for gross employee misconduct and financial recklessness. He will receive no end-of-month bonus. I looked at Mark, whose face was a mask of shock, betrayal, and sudden realization. And Mark, I added, my voice softening slightly, your own annual discretionary bonus is also terminated until further notice. You failed to exercise due diligence. Let this be a reminder of Arthur's commitment to integrity. Justin erupted. You can't do that. Dad, she can't fire me. The bonus is how I pay for the car. I smiled, a cold, serene smile of absolute victory. That's exactly right, Justin. I can. And I just did. You told me I was too old to drive my car. I've just proven I own the dealership you bought yours from. Now, George, please escort Mr. Jensen out of the service bay and inform the finance department to prepare for immediate repossession. The roar of the engines seemed to fade into the background. Justin, shattered, watched as George, the service manager he had just insulted, moved to take his keys. The tables had not just turned. The entire corporate hierarchy had been flipped upside down in a single, devastating moment, witnessed by his peers and the public. My revenge was complete. The fallout was immediate, total, and precisely surgical. Justin's humiliation in the service bay was only the beginning of the lesson. The moment George escorted a sputtering, pale Justin out the door, his keys confiscated and his precious charcoal sedan left parked in the employee lot, the corporate mechanism of his downfall engaged. I immediately returned to Mark's office, bypassing my stunned son, and picked up the phone. I called the dealership's head of finance. This is Mrs. Jensen, the majority trust owner. I need you to initiate a contractual repossession on the specific vehicle purchased by Justin Jensen last week. He has just been terminated for cause, and his collateral bonus has been voided. That vehicle is now officially in default. I want the paperwork expedited. The head of finance, a meticulous woman named Eleanor who was acutely aware of the trust majority status, didn't question the order. She simply stated, "Repossession initiated, Mrs. Jensen. We will dispatch the tow team first thing Monday morning." Justin had 2 days to realize the full horror of his situation. Mark, meanwhile, was in complete shock. His initial reaction wasn't empathy for Justin, but a dawning realization of the true, absolute power his mother wielded and his own diminished status. He tried to argue with me, pleading for his bonus and Justin's job back. "Mother, you can't fire my son. And my bonus, that's a huge portion of our quarterly income." "I just did, Mark," I replied calmly. "And you should be grateful I didn't fire the entire management team for allowing blatant nepotism and financial recklessness on company grounds. Justin's termination is justified by his misconduct, and your bonus is forfeited due to your failure to enforce Arthur's integrity standards. The business is fine, Mark. Your son's poor choices are not the business's concern." I left the dealership that day in the tank, leaving Mark standing in the center of the service bay, contemplating the fact that his wealthy life was merely a conditional gift, granted by the quiet woman he had treated like a charity case. Monday morning was when the lesson became brutal reality for Justin. The dealership, acting as the lien holder on the balloon payment contract, dispatched one of its unmarked tow trucks. They arrived at the affluent home Justin shared with roommates. Justin, already reeling from being fired, stumbled out in his pajamas, watching in disbelief as the two men efficiently hooked up his charcoal sedan. He ran at them, yelling about his dad, the CEO, and threatening lawsuits. The tow truck driver merely handed him the official notice of repossession, detailing the collapse of the financing contract due to the termination of his collateral income source. The entire neighborhood watched as the magnificent $90,000 symbol of Justin's entitlement was lifted into the air and towed away. He had the car for less than 2 weeks. He was stranded, financially ruined, and publicly disgraced. But the lesson wasn't complete until the last piece of the plan was executed. I had one final, symbolic instruction for the tow team. After you process the asset and secure the final paperwork, I want you to make one last stop at Justin Jensen's house. The tables were about to turn completely. The tow truck, having successfully reclaimed the symbol of Justin's shattered ego, followed its secondary, more nuanced instruction. It didn't return to the dealership. It took a slight detour, pulling up quietly to the curb outside Justin's affluent home. The expensive sports car was already gone, leaving an empty, humiliating gap in the driveway where it once sat. The driver, following my explicit instructions, backed up slowly and carefully released the cargo he had picked up earlier that week from my garage, the tank. The beige 1999 Volvo 850, the very vehicle Justin had derided as a death trap and a joke, now sat parked perfectly in the center of his empty, high-end driveway. It was a silent, magnificent symbol of poetic justice. I received a text message from George a few minutes later, confirming the swap. Mission accomplished, Mrs. Jensen. The tank is in the driveway. The keys are in the ignition. I imagine Justin emerging from his house, fired, facing financial ruin, and desperately needing transportation to salvage his personal belongings or explain himself to his father. He would see the empty space where his charcoal sedan had been. Then he would see the beige bulk of the tank, sitting there as a physical, undeniable manifestation of the grandmother he thought he could dismiss. The phone rang immediately. It wasn't Mark, it was Justin, his voice a strangled mixture of fury, panic, and sheer disbelief. "Grandma, what the hell did you do? Where's my car? And why? Why is that piece of junk parked in my driveway?" he shrieked. He was still focused entirely on the surface humiliation, completely missing the corporate chess game that had just ruined him. "Good morning, Justin," I said calmly, letting the sheer noise of his panic wash over me. "I merely facilitated a legal transaction. Your vehicle was in default. The dealership, as the lien holder, repossessed its asset." "But why is the Volvo there?" he demanded. "That's illegal. You can't just leave your trash on my property." "Oh, but I can, dear," I corrected gently. "I registered the tank to you this morning. It's a gift. A reliable vehicle, fully paid for, with 4 brand new tires that I just had George install last month. You're unemployed, Justin, and you're in debt. You told me the tank should be gotten rid of. I agreed. It needed a new owner who required a reliable, simple, non-finance form of transportation. I signed the title over to you. It's yours." The silence on his end was more satisfying than any shout. The humiliation was total. He wasn't just broke. He was now the proud owner of the very car he had publicly ridiculed, a daily reminder of his grandmother's unexpected power. "You are going to regret this, Grandma," he finally managed, his voice trembling with impotent rage. "You ruined my life." "No, Justin," I corrected, my voice sharp and final. "You ruined your own life when you decided that the value of a person was dictated by the cost of their car. You are currently the proud owner of a reliable, fully paid-for vehicle. If you think that is ruin, then you have learned nothing about the true cost of dignity. Now, put the tank to good use. You have a lot of apologies to deliver." I hung up the phone. My heart was pounding, but the years of humiliation, of feeling small and dismissed, had finally been erased by the quiet dignity of a beige station wagon. The final lesson was ready to be delivered. The phone call with Justin ended the final, direct engagement I needed to have with him. He had been stripped bare, fired, debt-ridden, and left with the physical embodiment of his own arrogance staring him down from his driveway. The rage in his voice, however, indicated the lesson hadn't fully taken root. It had only been imposed. The final act was not about the car. It was about the word that had motivated the entire revenge: dignity. I was sitting in my own quiet kitchen, watching the sun set over the garden, when my son, Mark, finally arrived. He didn't come to argue or threaten, but to ask for understanding. He looked utterly defeated, the CEO facade replaced by a weary man who had just discovered his entire life was conditional. "Mother," he began, sinking into a chair. "Why? Why did you do this? You didn't just fire Justin. You publicly humiliated him, and you destroyed my annual bonus. I didn't know about the 51% ownership. Why keep that secret? Why use it like this?" "I kept the secret because your father and I knew that absolute power corrupts absolutely, Mark," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "And I used it like this because you both forgot the principles Arthur built this business on. You let Justin run wild, confusing the family name with genuine worth. You let him leverage his name against the company's integrity and then offered to reward his failure." I walked over and placed my hands on the table, leaning slightly toward him. Justin looked at me, Mark, the woman who helped build the very business that pays his salary, and he saw a relic. He saw a death trap driver. He assumed because I chose simplicity, I lacked power. He abused the staff, damaged the company's goodwill, and created a financial crisis that was entirely avoidable. That kind of arrogance, unchecked, destroys everything we built. I then explained the crucial distinction. I didn't destroy him for the insult to me, Mark. I destroyed him for the insult to the dignity of work. Your father's dream was to pass down a business, not a trust fund for spoiled children. When Justin looked at my paid-for, dependable car and scoffed, he was scoffing at every working person who prioritizes reliability over reputation. He needed a harsh, immediate consequence that spoke his language: financial pain. I looked at Mark, waiting for the true realization to settle. Justin lost the car not because I was malicious, but because his employment, which he considered disposable and optional, was the only thing holding his debt structure together. I simply removed the foundation he had never bothered to strengthen. He is now forced to rely on the vehicle he mocked. The lesson is simple, Mark. Respect the source of your power, or it will be taken away. Mark sat there for a long time, absorbing the depth of the corporate lesson and the personal disappointment I felt in him. He finally nodded, a slow, painful acknowledgement of the truth. The lesson is complete, Mother. But what about his future? His future is now his own problem, Mark, I stated, standing up to signal the end of the conversation. He has the tank. It starts every time, and it costs him nothing. It is reliable transportation for a young man who has a lot of apologies to make and a new job to find. He will learn the true value of a paycheck and the dignity of reliability. Until he can prove that integrity is his guiding principle, he will not set foot back in Arthur's automotive group. My lecture was over. The verdict had been delivered not by a judge, but by the quiet power of a grandmother who understood that sometimes love required the most brutal form of correction. The arrogance of the grandson was shattered, replaced by the humiliating necessity of relying on the very object he had scorned. The quiet after the storm was the most profound part of the entire operation. The immediate chaos of the repossession and the firing had subsided, leaving behind a silence weighted with reflection. I had executed the revenge not just for myself, but for the legacy of integrity that my late husband, Arthur, had so fiercely protected. My revenge, however, had long-term consequences that I had calculated would be beneficial, not destructive. The $90,000 sports car was successfully repossessed, processed, and resold by the dealership. I instructed Eleanor, the head of finance, to take the profit and quietly invest it back into the trust reserve fund, securing my financial foundation further. I also used a small portion of the capital to fund Arthur's annual employee dignity fund, a program Arthur had started years ago to reward long-serving, hard-working employees like George, bypassing Mark's managerial oversight completely. It was a clear corporate message. Respect is now the highest currency. As for Justin, the transition was painful but necessary. He tried to sell the tank immediately, furious at the beige burden in his driveway. But he quickly discovered two things. First, that selling a newly registered car while unemployed and debt-ridden is nearly impossible. And second, that the tank, despite its age, was mechanically superior to the finance disaster he'd chosen. Within a week, his pride gave way to necessity. He was spotted driving the reliable old Volvo to the one place that would hire him immediately, a local fast food drive-thru. He was working for an honest, if small, paycheck and relying entirely on the death trap his grandmother gifted him. Mark, my son, was permanently altered. The shock of realizing his power was conditional had humbled him entirely. He never questioned my authority over the trust again. He stopped calling me to merely check in and started calling me for genuine business advice, acknowledging me as the true strategic head of the family. He understood that my simplicity was not weakness, but a carefully concealed lever of ultimate corporate control. He began restructuring the dealership's bonus system, prioritizing employee conduct and ethical sales over pure numbers, finally honoring the integrity Arthur valued. As for me, I continued my simple life. I kept the same small house and the same routines. But now, when I drove the tank, I didn't feel the need for secrecy. I had earned the right to my quiet dignity. I even took a small part of the money from the sale of Justin's repossessed car to hire a young, reliable driver for my longer errands. I often think about Justin, sitting in the tank, counting out change at a drive-through window. He hated that car, but he relied on it. He hated the lesson, but he needed the consequence. He thought he was too rich and too important to be challenged by his grandmother. He learned that the only true wealth is the dignity you earn, and the greatest power is held by the person who understands the quiet, fundamental rules that govern the entire game. I still drive the tank sometimes, rolling slowly out of the driveway, the old beige wagon humming its faithful song. And I smile knowing that my grandson, Justin, is out there somewhere, finally driving the value of honesty, one reliable mile at a time.